What is the nature of God's presence in the world? Hugely influential in the history of Christianity and the history of Western culture. So that sending of the word into the world doesn't just happen in the incarnation. It's happened lots of times before. So when the incarnation happens, this is not the first rodeo of the word. And that is what sets the word apart as unique within the world. He is the uniquely begotten Son. He uniquely has life in himself. And so the question is life to be found?
Welcome to Et Al., a podcast from Baylor University Press, where we interview authors and publishing experts to bring you the best scholarship in the fields of scriptural, historical, and theological studies, as well as the world of academic publishing. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to Et Al., a podcast of Baylor University Press. We're very happy to be here in Boston at SBL and AAR, and I am joined here by Steve Bryan. Thank you so much for being with us. Bryan is the author of The Visible Word of the Unseen God, Reading John Among Rivals Old and New. And he is the professor of New Testament at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School at Trinity International University. It's great to have you. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the book. I mean, it just came out. This is a very recent publication. So congratulations. I know it's exciting to kind of finally get something out the door.
Exactly.
And in your hands, a physical copy makes a big difference. So congrats. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for making some time for this conversation today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. All right. So you are exploring three rival traditions here. You have paganism, Judaism, and Christianity, and how they understand the relationship between divine reality and the material world. But there's also a kind of fourth angle here about reading John in a secular age and how it can be approached today. So how can one read John in a secular age? And why do those three rival traditions influence how we might read it now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wanted to kind of stand back and think about a question that I think is both ancient and modern, which is the question of how do we know if God is present in the world? What is the nature of God's presence in the world? So you can think about a modern form of that question, which is kind of the central question of secularism, and you can think about an ancient form of that question, in which the nature of God's presence or the possibility of God's presence is not what's in doubt, as it is for secular people. What's in doubt is how God is present in the world. And so to think about those questions alongside of one another, the ancient form of the question and the modern form of the question, seemed to me a way of thinking about the continuing or the enduring relevance of John for contemporary readers.
Yeah. Well, it's so helpful to even just identify the different questions that we're asking. It's not only that ancient people and contemporary people have different answers, it's that we're not even asking the same question. And so I think from an interpretive angle, it's really important to know that the question for them wasn't if, it was how.
Yes.
And for us, it's if.
It's if.
And so somehow we have to kind of bridge that gap.
That's
in
right.
Understanding. Okay, well, very good. So you've got this book and it's split into three parts. The first part is situating John's gospel in John's world. And then you have God's presence in the visible world as his presence in his visible word.
Yes.
Right? Okay. The word made flesh.
Yes.
Talking there. Okay. And presence, power, sanctuary, and spirit. Okay. So let's begin with part one. How does John present himself and his own perspective in the world? And how does that differ from the way his rivals read him?
I think John's opening movement, obviously much controverted, much discussed, hugely influential in the history of Christianity and the history of Western culture. We just have to step back and say, well, what does he do? Why is he so different from the other gospels?
Yeah.
What in the world is he up to? And as I pondered that question, I sort of came to the idea that in an ancient, late first century context, he's approaching this question of the how of God's presence in the world. How is God here?
Yeah.
And and contesting the notion that that God's presence in the world is his presence in images, or that God, and I come to this more toward the end of the book, or that God's just directly present in the Jerusalem temple. And he's equating a kind of identity between those two ways of thinking about God's presence in the world, or a God's presence in the world. So if you were a pagan, how did you think about a God's presence in the world? The God, at least episodically or periodically, inhabited the image, and you put that image in a sanctuary. Well, for John's Jewish contemporaries, there are no images.
Right.
But they did think about the temple as, as functioning, at least broadly speaking, in the same way as simply the place where God was. And that comes under heavy early Christian scrutiny. You see it in Stephen's speech in Acts, and you find a form of that kind of rhetoric in the book of John. I'm arguing, and so I think it would have been easy for first century Jews to look at the incarnation and what Christians were saying about Jesus and about directing worship to Jesus, and to say, well, that's just paganism. That you would worship a human being.
Right.
That's just a pagan idea.
Right.
And John is saying it would be pagan if he were not the Word of God. God is present in the world in his Word. And if we think about God's presence in the world as a mediated presence, then it's not idolatrous.
Okay. Unpack that phrase, mediated presence. What do you mean by that?
So by mediated presence, I mean that, if you think about like Stephen's speech again, we should not think that the God who dwells in the highest heaven, inhabits structures or anything made with human hands. He doesn't really go on to answer the question, well, where does God dwell?
Right.
How is God here? If he's in the highest heaven, how is he here at the same time? So you can think about this as a question of transcendence and immanence. These are perennial theological questions.
Right.
John's answer to that question is God's presence in the world is a mediated presence. He's here in his Word. He's present in his Word.
Yeah.
And this is a form of the second commandment, but it's a positive form. If I can put it in that direction.
Yeah.
The second commandment says, you shall not make images. But what prescriptively ought we to do? To obey the second commandment. And if the second commandment is really about how to worship, then John's answer to that question is by directing our service, by directing our worship, by responding to the presence of God in his Word.
Yeah. So from a Jewish perspective, this looks pagan.
It looks pagan.
From a pagan perspective, I would imagine it's kind of perplexing because it's Jewish, but there's maybe some other touch points with this emphasis on the visible, maybe with the emphasis on like the eating and the drinking, the kind of physicality of some of these Christian practices. So what does it look like from a pagan perspective?
From a pagan perspective, it's perplexing because, first and foremost, because it's aniconic. For us, we don't live in a, Western culture is downstream of the, the iconoclasm, the aniconic movement. Charles Taylor has even argued that secularism is part of the outflow of Reformation era iconoclasm.
Yeah.
It is the destruction of God's presence in the world in things. His famous term is disenchantment.
Yeah. Right.
So, from a pagan point of view, that to think about God's presence in the world as not inhabiting objects, or the presence of the gods in the world as not sort of interpenetrating material things, that's just a very, very odd thing. And from a Jewish perspective, the incarnation looks pagan.
Right.
And from a Christian perspective, it looks like emperor worship.
Yes.
From a Christian perspective, from John's perspective, No. If you go back and look carefully at like these founding narratives, where God calls Israel at Sinai, you hear God speaking, and it's visible, and they saw him.
Yeah.
So they saw his voice, for as one text says in the Septuagint.
Yeah. Okay. So let's follow that up. What you just said there. In part 2, which is the Word made flesh. Let's talk about this Sinai narrative in particular.
Yeah.
Because you say here, and I'm quoting, on John's reading, these narratives provide a basis for crucial distinction. No one can see God, but those who gathered at Sinai saw something. They saw divine speech. So could you unpack that for us? What does it even mean to see divine speech? And how does John receive that and reinterpret it in his context?
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer to the question, how do you see divine speech?
Okay.
And the answer of the narratives is that they just did. Like this is a very kind of non-literal reader like Philo of Alexander, Jewish writer.
Right.
He looks at these narratives, the Sinai narratives, and he's thinking about this question, and he says, well, how could they see God's speech?
Yeah.
And his answer goes something like this: God's words are not like human words, because they have such a quality to them that you can actually see God's words. So that's a Jewish writer.
Yeah, interesting.
And so what it allows us to think about is, the thesis statement of John's gospel, which is, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, and we beheld His glory.
Yes.
And what I want to suggest as a kind of thought experiment is, what if you were to change one word? And the word you changed was flesh to visible. The word became visible and tabernacled among us. Well, that's just what Philo's saying, and that's just what the book of Exodus is already saying.
Yeah.
Because that glory of the Lord that is beheld at Sinai,
right,
then comes and tabernacles in the tent at the very end of the book. So it's just the same 2-part structure we find in the book of Exodus.
That's really interesting. I mean, I suppose one kind of crude way that the difference between Judaism and Christianity, or the Old and New Testaments, has been presented is that in the Old Testament you have these kind of vague kind of notions of God and of the Son, but that God remains this kind of transcendent figure or something like that. And then in the New Testament, it's like plop, and out of nowhere, you get the revelation of the Son. Yeah. But you're suggesting that there's actually precedent for this within the Hebrew Bible itself.
Yes, and it's and one thing that has happened as a result of those ways of reading is to create this this real disjunction between the God of the Old Testament and God as He is revealed in Jesus Christ. A real disjunction between law and gospel, is how it's often framed up. But if the word that appears to Israel at Sinai in visible form is revealed to be the Son of God and the Messiah, then that word who becomes incarnate is the speaker at Sinai. The 10 words, what we call the 10 Commandments, those are His words. And so when John speaks about, those who love me, do my commandments, and every, all contemporary readers are like, what are the commandments? He doesn't really say, So the supposedly missing ethic of John's gospel, I think, we're getting a lot closer to the truth of John's ethic if we see the speaker at Sinai as the divine word in whom God is present.
Okay. Yeah. So all of that kind of intertextual connection that's happening in John, you're suggesting is pushing us to identify Christ with the lawgiver in that regard.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. He says famously in John 1:17-18, the law came through Moses. But I think for John, the law, as we see in chapter 5, is the inscripturation of the words that were spoken by the Word. So we can trace a kind of chain of custody from the Word to the words spoken to Israel, and then to the inscripturation of those words which came to Israel through Moses.
Yeah.
So, as long as as long as we keep that chain of custody, then as the Reformers saying, the scriptures are the word the word of God.
Yeah.
But if you break that chain of custody, then something very dramatic happens. Something very damaging happens. So Jesus will say in John 5, "You search the scriptures because you think that in them there is life. In themselves,
Right.
the scriptures have life, but they testify concerning me. I'm the speaker." So I take that text to be pointing not prospectively, but primarily retrospectively, and so try to kind of make that case.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're talking about the relationship here between Judaism and Christianity and the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament. And one way that John does that is by he's trying to make the claim that Jesus is the Messiah, but specifically as the Logos, as the Word.
Yes.
So how do those ideas come together in John? How is he the Messiah as the Word? What is it specifically about him as Word that makes him Messiah?
I think it means that when we go back to those Sinai narratives that speak about the descended Lord, that speak about the Lord as the fullness of grace and truth, in Exodus 34, that's John's kind of translation of those terms.
Right.
It gives us a vocabulary for identifying the characters that are there in the Old Testament stories, particularly the Sinai narratives. Who is speaking from the fire in Exodus chapter 3 in the burning bush? Who is speaking to Israel at Sinai? Who is declaring the name of the Lord in Exodus 34? It's the descended Lord, the one who speaks to Moses face to face. The one who is identified as as both God in Exodus 3 and the messenger of God. So which is he? Is he God or God's messenger? And,
Right.
And so you have these inherent
there.
ambiguities in the text. And John I think, he's exploiting those.
Yeah. And he's exploiting them maybe to what end? Like, what's his... I suppose the most basic way to frame the question is, who is Jesus to John?
Yeah.
Could you kind of unpack some of that in these terms?
Yeah, I think the reason, the to what end question is the Old Testament. I don't think John thinks it doesn't straightforwardly predict the incarnation. What it does provide is a precedent for the incarnation.
Okay.
And that precedent for the incarnation is the visible word that God sends in the world. That language is used. The Lord sent his word to the prophet Jeremiah. The Lord, so that sending of the word into the world doesn't just happen in the incarnation. It's happened lots of times before.
Right.
And so to what end is to give his readers a scriptural way of thinking about it. It's a scripturally reasoned case for thinking about the incarnation.
Right. Yeah. So you have all these scriptural patterns of God and God's word, right? And this sending effect, this even making visible in different kind of ways and situations, and John he's saying this is following that pattern. This is a recognizable pattern.
Yeah.
And so it's maybe we couldn't have predicted it beforehand, but it's the kind of thing that the God of the Hebrew Bible would do. Is that kind of what?
Yeah, I mean, Christians have talked about like typology for a long time. This is not typology exactly. There's patterns there.
Yeah.
But often when we think about typology, we're simply talking about a pattern. Like King David did such and such, and so that's a pattern that we can see that is then replicated when we come to Christ. What John is doing is something a little bit differently. I don't think he would deny that sort of thing happens, or that maybe even makes use of that kind of thing from time to time. But really, what he's more interested in is the identification of Jesus as a character in the story, and and the word becomes a way for him to locate Jesus within Israel's story as a character in the story. And so when the incarnation happens, this is not the first rodeo of the word, you know.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Sorry for the idiom. Some readers, some listeners
please.
might not be familiar with that American idiom. But
Sure. Well, we're from Texas, so we love a good rodeo analogy.
Of course. Well, I was playing to the audience.
Okay, so in that sense, then the revelation of the word is the revelation of something that has always been there in the text,
from
right?
creation.
Before Abraham was, I am. This is a declaration of a reality already present
in the world. Yes.
Yeah. I suppose it's kind of like, the end of a good mystery movie where everything sort of falls into place, and you're sort of like, oh, that's what that was all about.
Yes,
when you look back, it's kind of like, The Sixth Sense or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a dated reference. Sorry to all the youngsters out there who haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, very good. So let's then move on to part 3, presence and power, sanctuary and spirit. You begin with a chapter on the sanctuary as the dwelling of God in his word. Next, in chapter 9, you move to divine presence and work in the rhetoric of John in your chapter called Power, Magic, Word, and Spirit. So talk to us about John 5 in particular and the healing at the pool. So is the power in the pool, or is it in the spoken word?
Yes, that's what's being contested, right?
Yeah.
And so in the miracle that takes place at Bethesda at the beginning of chapter 5, the question is there just like somehow magically power in this pool? And it's a question ultimately about life, I think. Toward the end of chapter 5, text I mentioned before, he accuses the Judaioi, the often represented as the Pharisees or the chief priests in the story, of thinking that the scriptures have life in themselves. They are thinking about the scriptures in the way that the paralyzed man is thinking about the water. He's not a particularly sympathetic character in the story, and of course, famously, the Judaioi aren't sympathetic within the story as John tells it.
Yeah.
But there's a basic parallel that's being established between what happens in the story vis-a-vis the paralyzed man and what happens with the Judaioi. They are not thinking about life as being in the Word. So between those two incidents, Jesus will say, the Father has granted to the Son that he may have life in himself. And that is what sets the Word apart as unique within the world. He is the uniquely begotten Son. He uniquely has life in himself. And so the question is, where is life to be found? And the answer that John is giving is life is uniquely begotten by God in his word, who comes into the world as the begotten one, because life has been eternally and is eternally begotten in this one, and therefore he comes into the world as the giver of life. The speaking part becomes important because he gives life in the way that God gives life, by speaking.
Right.
And the 7 signs of John speaking is really important. What Jesus does by his speech. He's the Word who speaks certain kinds of words. He will describe his words as spirit. What are spirit words?
Right.
So that would be important for us to sort out as we make sense of John's gospel as a story about a character who speaks 2 kinds of words. The words we can hear, and then these pneumatic words.
Yes, yeah. These spirit words that carry with them a kind of creative power.
That have creative power, life-giving power.
Yes, yeah.
The best example of this is at the end of John 4. End of John 4, the royal official's son.
Yeah.
He says to the royal official, your son will live. Ordinary words. And the royal official believes those words.
Right.
And then he's on his way home, and he meets, servants coming and says, your son lives. And he says, well, what time did he recover? Did the life come back in him? And it was the same time that Jesus spoke those ordinary words. Well, those ordinary words correspond to some kind of in the sign some kind of pneumatic word because the Son hears them from afar. He hears them from a distance.
Yeah.
So, and then when the royal official hears that it was at the same hour, he believes again. In other words, he believes both kinds of words.
Right.
And so one ordinary testimony to the reality and power of those pneumatic regenerative words that Jesus uniquely speaks as the one who has life begotten in him.
Yeah. And I suppose all of that would connect to, of course, the end of John, where he says, we've written these things that you may believe.
And have life in his name.
And have life in his name. Yes. So I guess there's two questions there. What kinds of words, and maybe we can't answer this, but what kinds of words does John think that John is speaking in the writing of this text?
Yes.
And in the communication of the text?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think he thinks that he is speaking words that he classifies as testimony. That's how he describes what he's doing. He's testifying.
Yeah.
He was there from the very beginning to the very end. So he's kind of uniquely positioned to testify to Jesus. He's someone who's close to Jesus. So he testifies, and I think that's what we have in the gospel. I think there's a lot of testimony to Jesus. John the Baptist testifies.
Right.
John himself testifies. The scriptures testify. The Father testifies.
And at the well,
all these people testifying, these testifiers, Jesus himself testifies to himself. So his words, his ordinary words, are described as testimony. And he's testifying to himself.
Right.
Right. And so John's happy, for instance, to describe, for Jesus to be the prophet like Moses, because he speaks these ordinary, these words that we can hear and understand.
Yeah.
Those are testimony to what he does as the Messiah, which is he speaks pneumatic words that he will describe in John 6 as divine instruction, words that he speaks in crucifixion. These are words that he will describe using this word parousia, like these, which I think means this kind of bold, kind of effectual speech.
Yeah. So I suppose then that the words of Christ are kind of functioning on two levels.
They're functioning on two levels.
Moment, right?
Functioning on two levels.
And it's possible to catch one and miss the other, maybe, as a hearer.
This is the point that I think Jesus is going to, that John comes to at the end of John chapter 12, when he quotes from Isaiah about those who hear but don't hear.
Yeah.
And so that hearing without hearing, you hear the ordinary words, but you don't hear them, you don't believe them, and so you don't hear the regenerative pneumatic words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose the heroes of the story are always the ones who hear both. Right.
Yes.
The one whhose son, and he hears the normal words, as you just said.
Yes.
But it also registers at the deeper level, and he believes.
Yes.
And that's what sort of, I suppose, maybe the language taps him into the words of life, or whatever the language is there, that those words of life become effectual for him as an individual in a way that they weren't before.
Yeah, he believes twice.
Yes. He believes twice.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. And to wrap up, then, I suppose that if John is offering this to the readers and saying, we've written these things that you may believe, then the call is for all of us to believe twice.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, returning to the question, the contemporary significance of this, absent a transcendent word, a word that comes from out there to us. Whose word do we dwell in? Whose word do we occupy? And so, kind of at the end of the book, I explore what has been famously termed by Richard Rorty the linguistic turn in philosophy. The famous problem of the bridge. How do we create a linguistic map to what's out there, to the objects that we behold? And in the postmodern term, Rorty says, well, you can't. You know, all you have to live, to occupy, to dwell in is your own words.
Yeah.
And so that's how he conceptualizes a life. And meaning within the life is we create the words, we say the words, and then we live within them. We speak our own meaning. What culture is that to some limited extent we through exchange inhabit one another's words, but that's about the best you can hope for. And John offers what I think is a grand vision, a beautiful vision for a divine word coming into the world that then is offered up to us as a sanctuary. That and we are invited in to inhabit that sanctuary and to participate in the life of God. So we're not left simply with our own words in a world stripped of transcendence. We are offered the life of God in His Word.
Yeah, I think, was it Wittgenstein who said that the limit of my language is the limit of my world, or something like that?
Yes.
I'm butchering the quote, but something along those lines.
Yeah, and that, I think that's a perfect description of the human condition under the terms of both modernity and postmodernity.
And so then I think what I hear you saying then is that what God offers us is He offers to expand our world in what's available to us by offering us new words, right?
Yes, regenerative words, life-giving words, words that mediate to us the life of God, words that we can inhabit and in which we can live.
What a remarkable picture of a hospitable God who offers His words to us.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really excited about your book. Congratulations on it coming out.
Thank you.
And you can order the book today at BaylorPress.com, and I hope you'll go do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Thank you very much for joining us.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Et Al, a podcast from Baylor University Press. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to keep up with the latest from Et Al.